Okay, let's speak with David Marples. He's a professor of Russian and East European history at the University of Alberta, Canada. That's where he is right now. Professor, it's good seeing you. So firstly, after speaking with Vladimir Putin on Wednesday, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said he would be lying if he said he felt a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine was close. But what do you think this means for the Ukrainian counteroffensive? I mean, do you believe Russian forces are simply regrouping, as they say, to then possibly retake areas Ukrainian forces say they've retaken?
Well, the impression I get is that Russian forces in the field right now are not strong enough, not committed enough to retake the lands that Ukraine has taken. And that raises the possibility that Vladimir Putin may order a general conscription of the Russian population, which he's avoided doing so far. But I think the way things are going, if he doesn't do that, Ukraine will indeed take most of the land that's been taken from them. I cannot speak for Crimea, but I think there's a good chance right now, if the forces remain the same, that Ukraine could retake Kherson and it could retake most of the Donbass as well.
Well, I don't think Russia thinks it's as weak as we think it is. I mean, China's President Xi Jinping arrived in Uzbekistan on Wednesday. Is expected to meet with President Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. I mean, a lot is said about how much Russia relies on China to counter Western sanctions. There are even reports that Chinese companies support Russia's army. How much power do you think China really has in possibly getting Russia to end its attacks on Ukraine? And do you suspect it's something Xi Jinping wants to do?
Well, I think it's in China's interest to keep trade open with both Russia and Ukraine. This is a prime area for Chinese trade. And I don't think it's really in China's interest to come down too heavily on one side or the other. China could take Russian gas, and I think this would be a big help to Putin economically. China, I mean, actually could be approached from the Western side too. Right now, the United States has shown no sign of taking any interest in China. But I think if China were to be approached by the West as a sort of mediator, then this war might be brought to a halt much more quickly. And also would stress that I didn't say that Russia was weak. I don't think it's weak at all. But Russia has relied on conscripts and those employed by the army. It's not called a general conscription. I mean, it could theoretically deploy 800,000 new troops in the field if it so wished. But that would be a very unpopular move, I think, with the Russian population, and that's why it's not happened. But yeah, China is a big factor as well.
Yeah, China obviously can be approached. How do you think the West could approach China? What would China want to hear? But I mean, surely China does not like NATO nor the West. But obviously, as you said, a prolonged war is not in China's best interest. But what do you think China would want to hear that would help it change its tune as it pertains to its support of Russia?
Well, in a way, the West has sort of blown its opportunity when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, because that was seen as a real smack in the face by China. I mean, it has never happened before that an American high-level diplomat would do that. But nevertheless, there are precedences for the United States approaching China. If we go back to 1972, for example, in the middle of the Cold War, President Nixon and Henry Kissinger approached China and brought China very much into the discussion. And I think it's a possibility today. There is a tendency to see China as a bit of a bully in the zone. And of course, the Chinese leader is now perhaps the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. And the Communist Party keeps retaining him in power, even though theoretically he's reached the maximum age. But nevertheless, China cannot be discounted. And actually, neither can India either. I mean, India is another major player which has actually supported Russia and is relying on Russian imports for weapons and other goods. These are the two largest countries in the world. And to have them on the other side really means that the West only has limited support for its campaign on behalf of Ukraine. And I think that's the key factor right now, because Ukraine is doing very well, but there are limits to how far it can go. It relies almost entirely now on Western weapons. West can keep supplying weapons, but it needs to bring the big powers on board as well. It can't simply do this through NATO.
All right. Always great getting a perspective. Professor David Marples there from Alberta, Canada. Thank you.